Hey guys, hope everything's been going well the last couple weeks. This week we're going to change things up a little bit, but we're going to start right here with the quadratic formula. So make sure you're on this notes page. It has your steps at the top. So quadratic formula is another method that we use to solve quadratic equations. Now this method works every single time for every kind of quadratic equation. So if you can master this, you can solve any quadratic. First step is make sure your equation is set equal to 0 and written in standard form. So this example here is already in standard form. It goes from your biggest exponent down to no exponents in order, and it's set equal to 0. So make sure it's equal to 0. Next is to identify a, b, c, and actually also b squared. Okay, so off to the side here, a, b, c, and b squared. As long as your equation's in standard form, the a, b's, and c's should be pretty easy. So this is a, what's in front of your x squared, which in this case there's nothing, so that's a 1. In front of x is b, so this is -5. And your constant is going to be c, -36. And then b squared, you're going to take the b that you have up here and square it. Now, if you do it in a calculator, don't write -5 squared. Make sure you put parentheses around the -5, or do -5 times -5. This one will always be a positive number. So if you get a negative, you probably typed it in wrong. It should always, always, always be positive. So this would be positive 25. All right, next step is to substitute these values into the formula and simplify. Sounds pretty easy, but this is where it gets a little tricky. Here's your formula off to the side. All right, so it starts x equals, because we're trying to figure out where it crosses the x-axis, -b, so the opposite of this. A negative -5, or the opposite of -5 would be +5. Plus and minus the square root of b squared. That's why we did b squared. So here we have 25 minus 4 times a times c. When you do a and c, make sure you put your parentheses. So times a, which is 1, times c, which is -36. And then all of it, the whole thing, starting with that 5, is over 2 times a, which in this case is 1. All right, from there, you're going to do this part underneath your radical. This is called your discriminant. Okay, so in your calculator, you're going to type, starting with the 25. Don't put the square root, just start with the 25. All right, so I'm going to pull this up here. So we have 25. Oops, can't really see that. Minus, make sure you do minus, not negative. 4 times 1 times -36. Oops, 36. All right, we get 169. So I'm going to rewrite this now. X equals 5 plus and minus the square root of 169 over, and then 2 times 1 is 2. So we kind of did 2 steps at once. The discriminant, this whole thing equaled 169. And then we also multiply the 2 times a. All right, so you may want to write this over here. So the part that you need to simplify, first do the discriminant, which is the part under the square root. All right, after that, your second step is, can you square root? All right, so can you take the square root of 169? So let's see. I'm going to take the square root 169. It gives me a whole number, gives me 13, so yes, I can. If it's yes, then you go to the next part. If it's no, then you have to simplify. You know, where you break it down and look for pairs, okay? So this one did, so it's x equals 5 plus and minus, and then the square root of that was 13 over 2. All right, now this one, I said you have to go to the next step. So if this is a perfect square, you can take the square root of it, you get a whole number here. That means you got rid of your radical. So no more radical means you need to find your two answers. Okay, and here's what that means. Remember when we did solve by factoring and square root that you typically have two answers because the parabola crosses in two places? So here, this plus and minus breaks this down into two problems. So our first problem would be 5 plus 13 over 2. And our second problem would be 5 minus 13 over 2. All right, so 5 plus 13 is 18 over 2 equals 9. And then 5 minus 13 is negative 8 over 2, which is negative 4. So those would be our two answers, 9 and negative 4. So again, just as a reminder, if we were to sketch this on a coordinate plane, this graph, this parabola would cross at 9. Let's pretend 9's way out here. And then negative 4 maybe is here. And if we look back at our original problem, okay, this is going back to the characteristics last week. If this is positive at the beginning, then it's a happy face. So it's going to open up like this. So there's just a rough sketch of what your parabola would look like. All right, so there's one problem. Let's do maybe another one just to be sure. So number 1 has x squared minus 8x equals 20. Now our first step is to make sure that it's in standard form and set equal to 0. This is not equal to 0. So your first step is you have to take this 20 and move it to the other side so that your equation equals 0. So first thing you would do is subtract 20. All right, so now we have x squared minus 8x minus 20 equals 0. And then you can do your a, b, c, and b squared. So a, b, c, and b squared. A is 1, b is negative 8, c is negative 20. See, if we didn't move that at the beginning, you might have thought that c was positive 20, but it's not. It's negative 20 because it has to be on the same side as everything else. All right, and then our b squared, remember, is always going to be a positive number. So what's negative 8 squared? 64. All right, we're going to plug into our formula up here. So we have x equals negative b, so the opposite of b, which would be positive 8, plus and minus the square root. B squared, we had 64 minus 4. It's always going to be 4. That's part of your formula. Times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 20. All of that over 2 times a, which in this case is 1. All right, now we're going to simplify. So remember over here, we're going to start with the discriminant, the part under the radical. And we're going to type that in the calculator. All right, so let's see. We have 64 minus 4 times 1 times negative 20. And I get 144. So I have x equals 8 plus and minus the square root of 144 over 2. Okay, next step is, can you take the square root? You might know the square root of 144. If not, use your calculator. But the square root of 144 is 12. So we have 8 plus or minus 12 over 2. All right, and because we could take the square root, now you got to find your two answers, okay? So we have 8 plus 12 over 2. 8 plus 12 is 20. 20 divided by 2 is 10. All right, and then our second problem would be 8 minus 12 over 2. 8 minus 12 would be negative 4. Divided by 2 is negative 2. So there are your two solutions. All right, let me skip to the back here where you have an irrational solution, and I'll show you what those look like. So let's do number 9. Number 9, it's in standard form and it's equal to 0. So we can go ahead and start with our ABCs. A, B, C, and B squared. A would be 1, B would be 4, C would be 1. B squared, I'm going to take B, which is 4, and square it. It's positive 16. Always positive for B squared. All right, and then I'm going to write the equation over here so we don't forget. All right, so let's plug it in. X equals the opposite of B, so this would be negative 4 plus or minus the square root. B squared was 16 minus 4 times A is 1 and C is 1. All over the whole thing over 2 times A, which is 1. All right, again, we're going to start with our discriminant. I'm going to type that in. 16 minus 4 times 1 times 1. And you get 12. All right, so now we have X equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of 12 over 2. All right, our next step would be to see if we can take the square root. So can we take the square root of 12? No, see how it gives us a decimal? So that means you can't take the square root. So here's where you got to simplify. So I'm going to take the square root of 12 and break it down, maybe 4 and 3. 3 is prime. 4 you can break down to 2 times 2. Those are prime. And then you're looking for pairs. Here's a pair. Pair them up, kick it out to the front. So this becomes X equals negative 4 plus and minus 2 square roots of 3 all over 2. Now, if you can get that far, you're pretty good. You can actually simplify this just a little bit more, but if you can get that far, you should be good to go. If you want to take it a step further, this is what I call the heart method. So I'm going to see if I can simplify negative 4 over 2. And here's how I do that. So I do negative 4 divided by 2, math, enter, enter. Which all it does is simplifies the fraction, and it simplifies it to negative 2. So I'm going to put negative 2 over 1. And then I'm going to do this side. See how it makes a heart? Now, when you simplify this side, just ignore this radical here. Okay, you're only going to do 2 over 2, which hopefully you know simplifies to 1 or 1 over 1. So then all you do is replace these numbers with what it's simplified to. So really the simplest answer is negative 2 plus and minus the square root of 3, or 1 square root of 3. All right, now this actually has two answers. Okay, remember this plus and minus means there's two answers. So if you were to write them out, the first answer would be negative 2 plus the square root of 3. And the second answer would be negative 2 minus the square root of 3. Or you can write them together, negative 2 plus and minus the square root of 3. Let's do one more of these irrational ones, just so that you have another example. We'll go ahead and do number 10. All right, also in standard form and equal to 0. So we can go ahead and start listing. I'm going to do it over here. A, B, C, and b squared. A in this case is -1, B is -2, C is 7, and then our b squared comes from b. It's always going to be positive, and -2 times -2 is +4. All right, and then we'll plug it into our formula. X equals the opposite of b plus and minus the square root b squared, which we have 4, minus 4 times a, which is -1, times c, which is 7, all over 2 times a, which is -1. All right, we're going to type in our discriminant. So I have 4 minus 4 times -1 times 7, and I get 32. So I have x equals 2 plus and minus the square root of 32 over -2. All right, see if you can take the square root of 32. You can't, so we need to simplify it. Think about what you can break 32 into. You can do 16 and 2. 2 and 16. And then 16 you can do 4 and 4. Now here's a pair. Okay, so you can pair them up here. Or if that confuses you and you want to break it down, you can break it down still to 2 times 2 and then 2 times 2. Then you would have 2 pairs of 2, which when you multiply and bring them out to the front, it's a 4. And then this one's left over. All right, so this simplifies to x equals 2 plus and minus 4 square roots of 2 all over -2. And again, on this one, you could do the heart method to simplify if you feel comfortable trying to do that. If not, this is okay as an answer for right now in Algebra 1. If you did simplify it, you would end up with, I believe, -1 plus and minus 2 square roots of 2. So either of those works. All right, let us know if you have any problems. Good luck.